I'm 78 now. I spend most of my days in this quiet house. The kind where the ticking of the clock is louder than footsteps. And sometimes, in these still moments, I think about the moment I finally spoke, really spoke, to my family when I was 45. I remember it like a weight lifting and settling all at once. It wasn't a triumph, not exactly. It was more like survival, like finally stopping the pretending. I had spent so many years bending myself into shapes that would be acceptable, lovable, right? My parents, my siblings, they had this image of me that I was supposed to fit, neat and tidy. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself I was protecting them. But what I was really doing was hiding pieces of myself that didn't look the way everyone expected. I didn't realize, back then, that hiding slowly becomes a life of shadows. I grew up thinking that love was conditional, that family only accepted what they could understand. And I tried. Oh, I tried. I dated the people they approved of. I took the jobs that made them nod. I smiled at dinners and laughed at jokes that felt hollow. And every time I did, a little part of me disappeared. I didn't notice at first, because it was so gradual. It was a season passing, a smile too long held, a word I swallowed. But by my 30s, I was hollowing out the middle of myself. I remember one night in my late 20s, sitting on the kitchen floor, leaning against the fridge. Tears I thought I had swallowed all day sliding down anyway. My mother had been talking about my career, asking when I would settle down in a position that was respectable, and I smiled and nodded, pretending I cared as much as she did. But inside, I felt a little stone of despair drop into my chest. That night, I lay in bed with a journal I had never kept, just scribbling lines that made no sense to anyone, not even me. That was the beginning of a long pattern, private honesty and public pretense. By my 40s, I had mastered it. I could laugh with relatives, give advice, host birthdays, be the daughter, the sister, the wife while my own thoughts and desires rotted quietly behind closed doors. I had a kind of success, good job, stable home, but every time I looked in the mirror, I saw someone unfamiliar staring back. Sometimes I would catch myself hesitating before opening my mouth, choosing words that would be safe, understandable, instead of what I truly wanted to say. And each time, I lost another fragment of myself. Then, one afternoon, something small happened that broke the dam. I was at a family gathering. My parents and siblings all there, and my niece, just a little girl, asked me a question about why I always seemed serious. "Why don't you laugh like you used to?" she asked, tilting her head, and for the first time in years, I couldn't force a polite smile. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, leaning against the sink until my reflection seemed to ask the question I had been avoiding for decades. Who are you hiding from, really? It was that question that I carried with me for months. I realized that I could no longer afford to live like this, bending to the shape of expectation, shrinking in the corners of rooms, letting life slide past me while I pretended to exist. So I waited, as I had learned to do, because I was always waiting for the right moment, for courage to find me. And then I turned 45, and the waiting had become unbearable. I sat my family down one evening in the living room. My mother, my sister, my husband, they all thought it was another announcement about work. Or maybe about a move, a house, a change that seemed small. I remember the room smelled of the tea I had made, of old books and curtains that hadn't been washed in a while. It was ordinary, and yet, the ordinary had never felt so terrifying. I told them that I had spent years pretending to be someone I wasn't, that the person they thought they knew, the one they praised, advised, sometimes scolded wasn't the real me, that I had been afraid of losing them, afraid of disappointing them. And yes, I confessed that I had done things differently in private, things that might have seemed strange, different from the rules they had taught me. that I had quietly fought to be myself in small, unremarkable ways. And it had taken everything I had not to break down before. The room was still after that. Not the still of peace or understanding, but the still of shock. My mother's hands clenched her teacup. My sister stared at the floor. My husband's face was hard to read, like he was calculating something I couldn't see. I remember thinking, for the first time in my life, that I had no control over how this would land. That love, the love I had counted on, could feel like glass slipping through fingers. There wasn't yelling or dramatic exits. Just a long, quiet pause. And in that pause, I felt years of my life pressed down, years of hiding, of bending, of quiet sorrow. And yet, strangely, I felt lighter. It wasn't relief, exactly. More like recognition. Finally, I was visible to them in the rawest way. And finally, I could see myself too. I don't think any of us knew what to say at first. My mother eventually spoke, softly, asking questions I couldn't answer. My sister tried to be kind, but I could see her confusion. My husband, after a long silence, held my hand, but it was tentative, unsure. It was enough, in a way, but it was not a return to what we had been. That, I think, was the price. You can admit the truth, but you can't rewind what was never spoken before. In the months that followed, there were small, awkward moments. At a birthday dinner, my mother would ask me about my childhood, the real stories, and I realized how much I had missed. How much I had never really shared. My sister would make a joke about something trivial, and I would laugh in a way that felt lighter than I had in years. But then I'd feel a pang of sadness, remembering how much time had been stolen by silence. My husband and I learned new rhythms in our conversations, trading honesty for safety, discovering the life we hadn't built before. But the truth came too late in some ways. My father had already passed. Some friendships had quietly ended, and some family connections had frayed past repair. Some words I should have spoken when they might have mattered most were gone forever. And I carry that with me. I carry the memory of all the ordinary moments I could not be myself in. And I wonder if the small shadows of those years shaped the person I became. The loneliness I feel now, I think about my life and realize that most of it was lived, assuming there would always be more time to fix, to say, to show. And 45 was the year I finally understood that time doesn't wait, that some things can't be reclaimed, no matter how loudly you speak later. But the act of speaking, of showing up in your own skin at last, matters in its own quiet, unremarkable way. It doesn't undo the past, but it allows you, finally, to stand in the present without disguise. I remember small, private victories too. The first time I went on a walk alone after the confession, and didn't feel guilty for not having a reason acceptable to anyone else. The first time I bought a book I truly wanted, ignoring the opinions of family and friends. The first time I cried without hiding it from anyone, just letting the tears fall in the bathroom, on the kitchen floor, on the sofa, anywhere. Those were quiet rebellions, but they mattered. They reminded me that the self I had been suppressing was still there, stubborn and persistent. If there's anything I could pass along, it's this. The cost of hiding yourself is not always dramatic. It's the soft erosion of who you are, day by day. And speaking the truth, even when it's terrifying, even when it doesn't fix everything, it's a way to touch what's left of time that is yours. It won't heal the past. It won't bring back those who left, those who drifted away, those moments you can't undo. But it lets you breathe, really breathe, in the life that remains. I've made peace with that. Most days, anyway. Some days, the weight presses down. And I remember the long years of silence before I could speak. But I don't regret finally saying it. Because in the act of admitting the truth, I found myself again. And even if the world didn't rearrange to accommodate me, I did. And that, I think, is all I could have hoped for. And sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, when the house is empty and the clock ticks slow, I smile at that memory, not triumphantly, not even entirely happily, but with a kind of deep, quiet understanding. I lived, I hid, I spoke, and I survived. That is enough.